Hey, what's up, everybody? I want to welcome you to another episode of the Dreamerspro Daily Recap, where we give you a recap of all of the hot topics that we covered that day. You can catch them in their long format and also catch it fully streaming for free on Apple Podcasts. So this is a pretty interesting one. And it was something that kind of flew below the radar yesterday, or at least my radar. I didn't catch it yesterday, but I came across this news that various sources were reporting about it. I think I saw it on awfulannouncing.com. And essentially what they were doing was they were highlighting some comments that Stephen A. Smith had made on ESPN First Take yesterday. Now, if you know anything about Stephen A. Smith, he's been pretty straightforward, let me say this, about his feelings about LeBron over the last month or two, right? He's been calling LeBron James out in ways that I haven't seen him do, since maybe 2010, 2009. Back then, Stephen A. Smith used to really get on LeBron James, but ever since that period, he's kind of simmered down on him. But for the last year, he's been kind of going at LeBron, and it really happened with this whole GOAT argument. But recently, one of the things he's been getting on him for was his incessant need to control the narrative. Well, he was the one that was really going at LeBron over his podcast with JJ Redick called Mind the Game. And then, of course, now that we hear that JJ Redick most likely will get hired by the Lakers, it raises some eyebrows and some questions. And Stephen A. Smith has been one of the people out there that has been saying that, look, Darvin Ham got a raw deal. And he felt like LeBron doing this sit down with JJ Redick to talk X's and O's and strategy, didn't help Darvin Ham's chances of retaining his coaching position. And when he got fired, a lot of people came out and basically expressed their displeasure with the Lakers making that decision. And Byron Scott actually went on Undisputed, where he essentially said, look, when they were asking him who should be the next Lakers head coach, and he said, why doesn't LeBron coach the team? Because he seems to know everything. Let him coach the team. So what happened yesterday? They were on ESPN First Take discussing this. And then Stephen A. Smith brought up some information that I was unaware of, which was essentially that apparently a lot of NBA coaches that are black are actually upset with LeBron James over him doing the podcast with JJ Redick or something to that effect. So what we want to do now is we actually want to get into what Stephen A. Smith had to say so you could hear from the horse's mouth himself, right? Because he said he has people that have contacted him, black head coaches in the NBA that have contacted him over this issue. So what we want to do now is we want to play exactly what Stephen A. Smith had to say yesterday on ESPN First Take. It's not very long. And then we're going to come back and react to his comments. Take a listen to what he had to say here.
What I can tell you is this. Numerous coaches, black coaches, called me expressing how they took issue with that podcast taking place. And I think you know enough to know that that's true. Some of them felt very salty about that. We certainly are not blaming JJ Redick. You got your podcast. Maverick Carter approaches you about doing this idea. Who the hell would want to? I jump at the opportunity.
Wait, can I pause you on that? They were salty because he chose to do a podcast with a white guy, or because it hurt Darvin Ham?
Because it hurt Darvin Ham.
Okay.
Because it hurt Darvin Ham. So any of us would do a podcast with LeBron James. Anybody who says otherwise, that they wouldn't do a podcast with LeBron James, is lying through their damn teeth. I know I would. I know you would. I know Wendy would. I know anybody would. That would be an honor for us because he's one of the greatest who have ever played and he's a basketball savant. So we're not faulting JJ in any way for doing the podcast or for the content on the podcast with LeBron James. But at some point in time, we do have to do this, Jay. As I said to Wendy last week, we have to remember the things that we've said about LeBron James as it pertains to his brilliance, as it pertains to controlling a narrative, as it pertains to being.
So you heard what Stephen A. Smith had to say there about what some black head coaches had to say about this podcast. If I'm being 100% sincere with you, it is not something that even occurred to me. It never occurred to me. The thought never even came to me. Like, could this podcast lead to some black head coaches feeling a certain way about it? No, it really didn't. So then the question then becomes, because he said they contacted him, why would they feel a particular way about it? Well, let's look at it. What would be a particular reason, a possible reason for black head coaches to be upset with LeBron James over him doing the podcast with JJ Redick. Maybe they felt that, okay, prior to you having the show with JJ Redick, you had a new head coach in Darvin Ham, who was a rookie, started off his career with you. He had only been with the organization for 2 years, and instead of helping a black head coach get a foothold or toehold within the NBA, you do everything in your power to either get him fired or not stop him from getting fired. And maybe some black head coaches were looking at LeBron to say, bro, they're not that many of them in the NBA, so why don't you do your best to ensure that this guy retains his position as a head coach? And then if you couple that with the fact that a lot of people were upset over the Lakers firing Darvin Ham, then this could be a possibility. But nevertheless, it wasn't something that occurred to I never processed this situation. And while I was processing and thought about, well, what would black coaches think about him doing a sit down with JJ Redick? Could that be an angle? Possibly, but I don't really see it being such a big deal. The reason I say that is because although Darvin Ham only lasted 2 years, I think Frank Vogel only lasted 3 years. And Frank Vogel was white. So I don't know. I don't know. I think from the standpoint of LeBron James, I think LeBron is just looking for the person that he feels is the best person for the job, black or white. I could be wrong, but that's how I think LeBron is looking at the situation. I think if LeBron thinks JJ Redick is qualified, he will go with him. I think LeBron thought that Ty Lue was a qualified candidate, and they should have gone with him. And this is an example of a black and white head coach, in this case, candidate. But some people also got on LeBron. Well, some people like Stephen A. Smith said he could have done more to save Ty Lue's job in Cleveland. All of these, I don't know, right? It's Stephen A. Smith's story. I'm just reacting to it. And my thought on the situation is, this is something that never occurred to me. Or rather, this is news to me. I had never heard this brought up before. So these are my thoughts. Today we'll be talking a little bit about the WNBA. And funny enough, just last night, I was watching a segment from Gilbert Arenas' show, Gil's Arena. And during this segment, he had Kenyon Martin himself and WNBA legend Cheryl Swoops. They were on there essentially discussing the toxicity surrounding the WNBA and their young stars, and Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and just debating the hate surrounding both of these players. And it was a very, very in-depth conversation. It was about a 30-minute segment. It's generated 3,300 comments, but about 100,000 views. So a lot of people are interested in it. I didn't finish the segment. I only saw about half of it, about 16, 17 minutes of it, but I'm going to finish it later on. But it was a very, very interesting segment to just hear people give their views. And this is something that a lot of people are weighing in on, including us, right? We never used to discuss the WNBA, but now we are. We're talking about Angel Reese. We're talking about Caitlin Clark. Yesterday, we produced a show on it, and I was reacting to the incident that had occurred, the hard foul that occurred on the court against from Angel Reese against Caitlin Clark, and some people were saying was it flagrant or not, and there was a conversation surrounding all of that, and it seemed like some other people that weighed in on the conversation were undisputed, which had a panel of Skip Bayless, Keyshawn Johnson, and Paul Pierce. And usually how the panel works, at least from what I've been noticing, is that Paul Pierce will go first, and Keyshawn, and then Skip Bayless. Now, what is interesting is this, before we get into what Skip Bayless said. One of the major blowups that took place on television about 2-3 weeks ago on ESPN First Take was centered on the word or the notion that these current crop of players in the WNBA are jealous of Caitlin Clark. They didn't like the usage of that word. Even former moderator on ESPN, I forgot her name, she came out, we did a show about her. She came out and kind of push back on the word jealousy, right? And I'm sitting here saying to myself, since when did the word jealousy become a weaponized word? But nevertheless, they were making a big deal out of it. So what was interesting was when it came time for Skip Bayless to weigh in on what's taking place in the WNBA, specifically as it pertains to Caitlin Clark, he didn't hold back, and he then went on to say that he notices there's a lot of bitter jealousy that exists within the WNBA towards Caitlin Clark. And I was like, whoa, this would be something very, very interesting to touch on today. So what we want to do now is want to play exactly what Skip Bayless had to say on Undisputed. I want you guys to listen to it in its entirety, and then we're going to come back and react to what Skip had to say. Take a listen to that there.
So now I listen to her post games, and yeah, she's become the villain. I don't think she wants to be the villain, but she's become the protagonist, the opposite. She's the
instigator.
She's the instigator.
100%.
Her post games reek a little bit of jealousy and bitterness. That's how it comes across to me. But I don't know. I can't. They're still too young for me to know for sure where they're going to sort of stand.
Maybe edgy. Maybe
yeah,
she's
definitely
edgy.
I told you she talked that talk. She just got a different.
She play with an edge and she talk with an edge.
She's got a different style.
I get it.
She's going to have to accept the fact that when her team on Friday night went to play the Washington Mystics, they kept it in the little gym, the little building, which holds 4,200, and that's what they drew. And when Caitlin went there a couple of weeks ago to play the Mystics, who are the worst team in the league, they moved it to the big gym. They moved to the big arena because it was the Capital One arena, and they sold 20,333 seats. So Angel drew 4,000 basically, and Caitlin drew 20,000. Okay, that's a fact. That's been happening consistently.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at what's happened in these two losses, and Caitlin has outplayed her. So she's just gonna have to play better. And even on rebounding, she's a great offensive rebounder, but Caitlin's now only 5 back of her in defensive rebounds for the season. Well, that's pretty good. So Caitlin's averaging 16, 5, and 6, and Angel's still having a good rookie year at 12, 10, and 2. Mm-hmm. But the point is, all of her post game, and again, she's playing the villain role, it just comes off as so negative. You guys like the media is against her. I don't think the media is against her. And when she says special whistle, I got to tell you, I've watched every one of Caitlin's games. There have been so many times when she's trying to dribble the ball up the court and she gets met at half court by a very physical defender who just footballs her, just attacks her, and they don't ever call it. They just let them play, and I'm great with that. Yeah. But you can't tell me she's getting a special whistle or she just marching to the free throw line like James Harden used to march to the free throw line. So I don't see special whistle. No. And that Kennedy Clark play, I don't know. That just looked bitter to me. That just looked like she called her the B word and just went after her.
So you heard what your man Skip Bayless had to say. Do you know what is funny about what Skip said? Gilbert Arenas said the exact same thing. Rashard McCants said the exact same thing, that they believe that there's some jealousy that is taking place here. What is also interesting is the following. I'm going to read some of the comments of what people were saying under that Gilbert Arenas video. Some people said, let me read. There was a person that I was reading. Another person said, hating always makes a person look ugly to me. It's another tier when you old and hating. That's what some people say. Sarah Woods just keeps showing she's a CC hater. The CC now is a new acronym for, or abbreviation, sorry, for Caitlin Clark. Anyway, Cheryl sounds flat out ridiculous. Another person said, she is acting like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are on the same level of popularity. Whether you like it or not, Caitlin Clark is the show, period. Another person says, she's a certified hater. Another person said, Mrs. Swoops is trying so hard to speak around her jealousy. She is delusional. And people started going off on that in terms of what Skip Bayless said. One person said, this is embarrassing for Skip and also embarrassing for Keyshawn and Paul Pierce to just sit in silence while he spews the dog whistled narratives. Another person said she's jealous that she decided to lead the league in multiple stat categories while averaging a double-double as a rookie. Weird. So what I'm gleaning from all of this is that there's a school of people that thinks some of these players are hating on Caitlin Clark beyond the competitive nature of the WNBA, beyond the fact that the WNBA is a more physical league than the NBA. I think the reason the NBA stopped being a physical league is because of that brawl in the Malice at the Palace. After that, they's like, no, we got to crack down on that because we cannot have another brawl. Before then, the NBA used to be very physical. There used to be some serious, the Knicks with Carmelo and these guys, and there have been plenty other brawls that used to take place in the NBA. So I think that's the reason the NBA cracked down on that. But there are two schools of thought here. One school is saying, y'all are hating on Caitlin Clark and the young bloods that are coming in the NBA, in the WNBA. There's another school of saying, no, you're oversimplifying it. We're not hating on them. It's just that we're competitive and we're putting them through the same process that every other rookie had to go through that was in their position. And these are the two groups. Now, what is interesting to me, however, is that the group saying that, look, we're not jealous. There is no jealousy that exists within these players towards these new young stars. It just, their competitive fervor coming through. They are trying to now silence the other group by saying, how dare you use terms like jealous, right? And it's one of the reasons people have been pushing back on Stephen A. Smith and others. What do I think? Do I think an element of jealousy exists? Yes, I do. And I think it's a natural thing, because when you've been doing something for some time and then somebody comes in and all of a sudden they get elevated way past you, they're getting all of this attention, and you don't feel like it's warranted because you've been here putting in all the work, jealousy may creep in. It's a human thing, right? It's a human thing. I don't think it makes you, it makes you less human to be jealous. If anything, it makes you more human. Now, how you react to your jealousy is another thing. But is it an element? Sure, because I think it's a human thing. Men and women feel jealousy. I mean, hello, newsflash, it happens, right? And I think that that's what the Gilbert Arenas is, the Skip Bayless is, and so many other people are saying there's some jealousy that exists here. There's some player hating that's taking place, literally. Player hating that's taking place here. And I thought it was very interesting for Skip Bayless to basically step up and say it, because Skip is in a position where he doesn't really care what people think. So I don't think Skip sat back and thought, well, if I use the word bitterly jealous, it's going to offend so-and-so person. No, I just think Skip said, this is what I think, and that's exactly how I'm calling it. So I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm going to leave it to the audience. As you guys know, towards this time last year, ESPN had some major layoffs. Some of the people were Jalen Rose, Max Kellerman, Mark Jackson, and of course, longtime contributor on ESPN who used to cover NBA games, former head coach, Jeff Van Gundy. Now, if you remember Jeff Van Gundy, he had some colorful commentary. He used to call out some of the dumbass things that would happen during NBA games and all of that. And apparently after he got fired by ESPN, according to because they were downsizing, we then later heard that the NBA, in this particular Adam Silver's, wasn't a fan of the critical commentary from Jeff Van Gundy about the NBA. It was something that he wasn't happy about. Since then, we hadn't heard much about him until yesterday. And as a matter of fact, before we even get into what happened yesterday, we got some breaking news right now that we're getting from Adrian Wojnarowski, which is Jeff Van Gundy, ESPN sources Jeff Van Gundy, who spent the season as a senior consultant for the NBA championship Boston Celtics, has agreed on a deal to become the lead assistant on Ty Lue's Los Angeles coaching staff. And then he also added, Van Gundy, considered one of the finest minds in basketball and had been pursued for years to rejoin coaching in a full-time basis. He led the Knicks and Rockets to 430 regular season games and 44 playoff wins in over 11 seasons. So Jeff Van Gundy is going to be back coaching, at least from a lead assistant role, with the Los Angeles Clippers. So shout out to Jeff Van Gundy. Congratulations to him. But yesterday, Jeff Van Gundy did a sit down with Mason Cameron's show called Come and Talk to Me. And he was speaking to Mark Jackson, his former partner on television. And essentially what he was doing was he was basically, revealing what it was like to be fired at ESPN and really finding his way back into the NBA through Brad Stevens from the Boston Celtics extending an olive branch. And he was basically explaining what that entire process was like to Mark Jackson. So what we want to do now is we want to play exactly what Jeff Van Gundy had to say to Mark Jackson on him being fired from ESPN and what it was like after that, and then want to come back and react to his comments. Take a listen to what he had to say here.
But I would like to know, seeing you and my father, Mike Breen, just the whole team, for years I watched you guys, and everybody loved what you guys had, which is such a special thing.
Not everybody.
Well, most of us.
Yeah. Okay.
But Coach, I want to know, what was it like just emotionally closing that door and moving into your next segment of life?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I got fired on June 30th, and then my youngest Grayson went to school in August, so we became empty nesters. Then my sister-in-law tragically passed away in the middle of August as well, and my best friend in Houston contracted cancer and subsequently died this spring. And
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah, and so for me, when I went to work for the Celtics after the World Cup last fall, I only knew Brad Stevens a little bit. And I was really in an awkward place in life, not really knowing, where I was going or what my purpose was or how I was going to be with this new group of people where I didn't know anyone. And quite frankly, it's been one of the most rejuvenating things I've ever gone through. Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla threw me a lifeline, and everybody on that coaching staff has welcomed me with open arms. It's a very young coaching staff. Sam Cassell is, I think, the oldest. There's no one else other than Sam that's over 40 years old. I have learned so much. I have been embraced and welcomed in. And the whole organization, from ownership to Brad's staff to the coaching staff, has just been remarkable. And I think...
So you heard what Jeff Van Gundy had to say there. What are my thoughts about that? Well, Jeff Van Gundy being fired from ESPN was a shocker to a lot of us, because I really enjoyed the job that he did with Mark Jackson covering NBA games, especially NBA Finals. I thought they were great, right? I thought they were really, really good. So to see ESPN get rid of Jeff Van Gundy was really, really, surprising to me. But, I guess it's part of the business. They let go of some other big names, as I mentioned before, Max Kellerman, Marcellus Wiley, who's a friend to the show. We have asked him on a couple occasions, what's that situation been like for Max Kellerman? And he basically said Max Kellerman is just sitting back collecting checks while he plots his next move. And he expects, Max Kellerman to come back into the sports media space fairly soon. So we have that out there. But in the case of Jeff Van Gundy, if you listen to the things that he went through, it must have been a very, very difficult period for him, right? And for him to somehow still find a way to maintain his sense of humor and then find himself back in a assistant coach or lead assistant coaching a position with a very good organization in terms of the way that they ran, and going to be now part of the new Intuit Arena, working there. I think that's very good news for him. Right. I think that's very good news for him. If you remember anything from Jeff Van Gundy's coaching days, I really started following him when he was coaching the Houston Rockets back when Steve Francis used to be my favorite player. Jeff Van Gundy was one of those coaches that was really hard on his players, and he was a defensive-minded head coach. I mean, that's exactly what he is. He was a defensive-minded. He wanted his teams to play great defense. He was one of these guys, just like his brother Stan Van Gundy, who, he just didn't like players making mental mistakes and having mental breakdowns. That was something that just really bothered him. So to see Ty Lue add him to the Clippers coaching staff, I think is a very good thing. And Lord knows the Clippers need to bolster their defense. So to add someone like this, a defensive mind like this, and someone who's also been a head coach, you just basically bolstered your coaching staff by adding essentially another head coach to your roster, right? So I think that's a good thing for him. I am very happy for him that he's found a way to bounce back, and now he's found his way back into the NBA, where I think he's most comfortable. But I just thought that, to see him go through what he went through during that period after he got fired from ESPN and all of those tragic moments that he endured, to see him kind of bounce back on his feet and come back stronger than ever, I think is a really good thing and admirable on his part. So